There is a particular cruelty in arriving late to your own grief. Darius Langford had spent 8 months not grieving. He had done everything except grieve. He had closed a $40 million acquisition in Seattle 3 weeks after Simone left. He had renovated his penthouse in Midtown Atlanta, replacing everything she had touched. The reading chair by the window, the art she'd chosen for the hallway, the coffee maker she'd bought because she said his old one made the coffee taste like it had given up on itself. He had started going back to the gym at 5 in the morning, not because he wanted to, but because the 5 o'clock hour was the one part of the day he had no excuse to be still. He had not grieved. He had replaced. He was good at replacing things. His mother had made him good at it. Constance Langford, who had built Langford Capital from a 2-room accounting firm in College Park into one of the most respected investment groups in the Southeast, had raised Darius with a single dominant philosophy. Sentiment is a luxury that bankrupt people can't afford. She did not say this cruelly. She said it the way certain mothers say everything. As preparation, as love expressed through armor, as the best way she knew to make sure her son would never hurt the way she had hurt. He was 40 now. He had the penthouse. He had the company. He had Rochelle, who was 29 and beautiful in a way that photographed well at charity events, and who had a law degree from Georgetown, and who his mother approved of thoroughly. What he did not have was Simone. He had been telling himself for 8 months that this was fine, that Simone had left, sovereign, that people who left without an explanation didn't deserve to be chased, that he was too old and too busy and too practical to be undone by a woman who had packed a single bag and disappeared while he was in Dallas closing a deal. He had been telling himself all of this very successfully until the Tuesday evening in March when Rochelle said, "I want to go to Alara," and Darius said, "Fine," and they walked into the most celebrated restaurant in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood at 8 o'clock. And Darius looked up from the reservation desk and saw his wife standing 5 feet away clearing a table. Not his ex-wife, his wife. They had never divorced. She was wearing a black server's uniform, fitted, simple, the kind the staff at a place like Alara wore. Her locks were pinned back the way she always pinned them when she was working, when she had a small tray balanced on one hand and a stack of side plates on the other, and she was moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing this job long enough to do it without thinking about it. She was very pregnant. The word very does not cover it. She was far along. 8 months, Darius would later learn, though in that first moment he could only stand there and let the sight of her rewrite every story he had been telling himself since August. His mind went to the math immediately, the way a business mind always goes to math, and the math was simple and devastating. She had been pregnant before she left, or she had become pregnant just before she left. Either way, she was carrying his child. He knew it without asking. He knew it the way you know certain things, in the chest, below the level of language, and with a certainty that needs no verification. The person beside him said something. He couldn't hear it. Simone turned and saw him. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Darius watched 6 things happen across Simone Langford's face in rapid succession. Recognition, pain, something that might have been relief, the deliberate suppression of all 3, composure, and finally a careful, professional blankness that cost her something visible. She turned away. She kept moving. She disappeared between tables with her tray and her plates in her belly, and she did not look back. Rochelle, Darius. The maitre d' was speaking to him. "Your table is ready." Darius followed him on autopilot. He sat down. He accepted the menu. He looked at the wine list and did not read a word of it. Rochelle leaned across the table, her voice low and sharp. "She looked at you, I know. Who is she?" Darius set the wine list down. He looked at the room, the white tablecloths, the low lighting, the soft sound of other people's conversations, the whole serene machinery of a place designed to make wealth feel inevitable. He looked for Simone. He couldn't see her. "She's my wife." Rochelle's face went very still. "I'm sorry. We never divorced. She left 8 months ago and He stopped. He had been about to say, "I didn't look for her." He couldn't say it out loud. Not here. Not anywhere. A different server came to take their drink order. Rochelle ordered wine in a voice that had gone very controlled. Darius ordered water and sat with his hands flat on the tablecloth and waited. It took 12 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock above the bar. Then Simone appeared at the edge of his periphery, moving toward their table. And he understood that she had been assigned to Section 3, and she had not known he would be in it. And she had spent 12 minutes deciding whether she could do this professionally. She had decided she could. She stopped at his table. Her face was composed, the way a person's face is composed when composure is an act of discipline rather than feeling. She held her notepad with both hands, not writing anything, just holding it. "Good evening," she said. "Can I start you with anything while you look at the menu?" Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, low, clear, careful with words. He had fallen in love with her voice before he had fallen in love with anything else about her. Had heard her across a room at a fundraiser 6 years ago, like explaining something to someone about the restorative properties of certain soil bacteria, and had thought, without meaning to, "I want to listen to that voice for a long time." "Simone," he said. Something crossed her face, not the composure, the thing underneath it. "I'm working, Mr. Langford." Mr. Langford. He felt the two words like a door being closed. Rochelle was watching all of this. Darius could feel her watching the way you feel heat from a source you're not looking at. "I need to talk to you," Darius said. "You need to order or let me move to another table." Her voice was still professional, but her hands on the notepad were not. Her knuckles were white. "The baby, don't." "Simone?" His voice came out raw, one syllable raw. "Is it? Please." She said it very quietly, not the professional voice. The real one, the one underneath. Please don't do this here. I'm working. I need this job. Please." Something about that word, need, broke through every wall he had been building for 8 months. She needed this job. She was 8 months pregnant and on her feet in a restaurant at 8 o'clock at night because she needed this job. The woman who had lived with him in a 43rd floor penthouse. The woman whose name was still on his account because he hadn't been able to bring himself to have it removed. She was about to say something else. But the restaurant manager, a thin man in a black blazer, arrived at the table with a professional smile and the practiced anxiety of someone who has noticed a disruption in his carefully orchestrated evening. "Mrs." he began, then caught himself. "Is there anything I can help with?" "No," Simone said. She looked at Darius. "I'll send someone else to your table." She walked away. She moved between the tables with that quiet efficiency, that careful balance, her hand briefly touching the back of an empty chair to steady herself, a gesture so small that nobody else in the restaurant would have noticed it. Darius noticed it. Beside him, Rochelle picked up her wine glass and took a long, deliberate sip. Then she set it down. "I think," she said, "I'm going to call a car." Rochelle, "Don't apologize, Darius." She said it without anger, which surprised him. She said it the way people say true things when they have been waiting to say them. "You have been somewhere else for 8 months. I have known that. I kept hoping you would come back." She looked at him across the white tablecloth. She looked at him carefully, almost the way someone looks at a thing when they are deciding whether to keep it or let it go. "Go find your wife." She stood. She picked up her purse. She walked out of Ilara, and he heard her heels on the marble, and then the sound of the door, and she was gone. The empty chair across from him said everything Rochelle hadn't. Darius sat there for 4 minutes. Then he stood up, laid $300 on the table without waiting for a bill, walked through the restaurant to the kitchen corridor, and pushed through the staff door. He thought, walking through the restaurant, about the 8 months, how they had looked from the outside, functional, forward-moving, the picture of a man who had absorbed a loss and continued. He had continued. He had been spectacular at continuing. He had a gift for it. The ability to restructure around a missing piece and make the structure look whole. He thought about the morning he had come home to the penthouse and found her gone. Not dramatically gone. There had been no overturned furniture, no note with accusations. Just her things, selectively absent. The gap in the closet where her clothes had been, her toothbrush, the small wooden box she kept on the nightstand that had belonged to her grandmother. The absence of those things was more clarifying than any scene would have been. She had not left in anger. She had left in fear, in sadness, in the careful, deliberate way a person leaves when they believe they have no other choice. He had not understood that at the time, and he had understood it as abandonment, had let his mother's narration of it fill the space where his own understanding should have been. Rochelle had arrived in that space 3 months later, recommended by his mother as a friend of a friend, appropriate, accomplished, from the right world. He had not examined the timing. He had been too grateful for the distraction. He was not grateful anymore. He was clear. The back of a restaurant always tells the truth about the front of it. Behind Alara's white tablecloths and crystal service and ambient lighting was a kitchen that smelled like rendered fat, an industrial cleaner, and controlled panic. Line cooks moved with the focused aggression of people who hadn't sat down since 2 in the afternoon. A dishwasher ran a sound like machinery being questioned. The expeditor called tickets in a voice that had long since stopped being polite. And in the narrow corridor between the kitchen and the back door, sitting on an overturned milk crate with her shoes off, her feet bare on the concrete floor, and one hand pressed against the small of her back, was Simone. She heard the staff door open. She didn't look up. Not until she heard his voice. Simone. She looked up. She had been crying. Not helplessly. Not the way she might have cried 8 months ago, but the tight, controlled way a person cries when they have been crying alone for a long time and have learned to do it efficiently. Her eyes were red at the rims. Her mascara was intact. Her chin was level. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the wall behind him. "You can't be back here. Staff only." He crouched down in front of her. He was in a suit that cost more than she made in a month at this job, and he was crouching on a concrete floor in a restaurant corridor, and he did not seem to care at all. "How long have you been working here?" "That's not what you should be asking." "No." He took a breath. The baby. He looked at her belly, round and obvious under the black uniform. "Is it mine?" Simone looked at him. There was something in her expression that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow. Something older and more tired than either of those things. "Yes," she said. "Of course it is. Of course." As if the answer were obvious. As if she would not have left otherwise. He filed that away, turned it over. "When did you find out?" "About 3 weeks before I left." The timeline hit him. She had known for 3 weeks and hadn't told him. She had known she was pregnant with his child and had packed a single bag and gone. "Why didn't you tell me?" Simone pressed her lips together. She looked at her hands in her lap, at her fingers. Hands that showed the work she'd been doing, the calluses at the finger pads from carrying trays, the dried-out skin of someone who washed their hands 100 times a shift. These were not the hands of the woman who had lived in his penthouse. Because she said slowly, "I was afraid of what would happen if I did." "Afraid of me?" She looked up at him. "Not you. Her." He didn't have to ask who. He felt the word land in a specific place in his chest. The place where, if he was being honest with himself, he had always known the problem lived. Constance. Simone didn't say anything. She didn't need to. "Tell me," he said. When she looked at him for a long moment, measuring something. Whether he could hear it, maybe. Whether he would believe her. Whether it would cost too much to say out loud. "She came to the apartment," Simone said. "When you were in Houston for the Meridian deal, she didn't call first. She used the key you gave her for emergencies. I had just found out. I was still holding the test. She walked into the bathroom and saw it. Darius was very still. She congratulated me," Simone continued, very warmly, "and then she sat me down at my own kitchen table and told me that if I tried to use a pregnancy to secure my position in your life, she would make sure that child never knew a comfortable day. She said she had a family court attorney on retainer and connections at DFCS, and that she had been watching me since the day you brought me home and had compiled documentation of everything she believed made me unfit. She described it in detail. What an unfit mother looked like. How easily a judge could be swayed. How long a custody battle could last, and how expensive it could become for someone without resources." She paused, and then she smiled at me and asked if I wanted coffee. Darius stood up. He walked to the far end of the corridor and put both hands against the wall and stood there. Simone watched him. She had been watching him for 6 years, had learned the language of his body the way you learn the grammar of a second language, slowly and then all at once. She knew what his shoulders looked like when he was controlling anger. They looked like that now. She kept talking, not because she wanted to wound him, but because she had been carrying this alone for 8 months, and the weight of it was physical by now, something she felt in her joints on bad days. I tried to tell you. She said it carefully, not as an accusation, or not only as an accusation. The week before I left, when you came back from Houston, I said I needed to talk about your mother, and you said, Simone, not tonight. I've got the Singapore call in the morning. She paused. That was the third time I had tried to bring it up in 2 months. Each time you redirected. Not because you didn't love me. I believe you love me. But because the topic of your mother is a door you have never been able to keep open for long. She was right. He knew she was right. And he had known she was right from the moment she said his mother's name in the dining room of the restaurant. And he had been standing against this concrete wall for 30 seconds already, trying to figure out how to make that truth fit inside a version of himself he could live with. She had threatened our child, Darius said. He turned around. His voice was quiet and even, which was not how he usually sounded when he was most angry. Quiet and even was how he sounded when he was past the point where anger was useful. I know that now. She shook her head. I believed her then. Your mother is the most capable person I have ever been afraid of. I believed she could do exactly what she said. Where have you been living? The question changed the temperature of the conversation. Simone looked at her bare feet on the concrete. I have a room. In Decatur. A boarding house. It's clean, and the woman who runs it is kind. A boarding house. Darius. She said his name the way you say the name of someone you are trying to keep calm. I made choices. I know what they cost. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. You're 8 months pregnant and working a restaurant shift in heels, and you're in a boarding house in Decatur. Yes. How many jobs? A pause. This one. Days at a laundry service on Moreland. And weekends I do alterations for a woman in Kirkwood who runs a seamstress business. 3 jobs. I have a child coming. Our child. His voice was measured now, with an effort that was visible. Our child, who you have been protecting alone, in a boarding house, working 3 jobs. However, because my mother sat at your kitchen table and threatened you, and I was in Houston and not available for a conversation that I would have redirected anyway. She looked at him. All of that is true. He crossed the corridor and crouched down in front of her again. He was close enough now that she could see the things in his face that he usually kept managed. The lines around his eyes that the last 8 months had deepened, the gray that had advanced at his temples, the specific exhaustion of a man who had been telling himself a lie for long enough that maintaining the lie had become its own kind of work. Come with me tonight, he said. She shook her head. Simone, I am not walking back into that life on your terms on the same night you happened to run into me. She said it clearly, without cruelty. I am not a problem you get to resolve because your evening was disrupted. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He thought about it. He did not give her the easy answer. He sat with the question the way she had always wished he would sit with things, and she watched him do it. It is me, he said finally, sitting on a concrete floor behind a restaurant, trying to understand how I became a man whose wife was more afraid of his mother than she was of being alone and pregnant. Simone was quiet. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight, he continued. I'm not asking you to trust me tonight. I am asking you to let me take care of you and our child for tonight. One night. After that, whatever you need, distance, time, a conversation about every single thing that went wrong, I will give you, but not tonight. Not with you sitting barefoot on a concrete floor with your back hurting. Her back, he noticed, was still against the wall. Her hand had moved back to the small of her back. She looked at him for a long time. She was looking for the thing she had spent 6 years loving about him and 8 months trying to forget. The part of him that was not his mother's construction, not the acquisition and the armor and the deliberate blankness, but the Darius underneath all of that. The one who had crouched down to her level at a fundraiser 6 years ago because she was sitting on the floor looking at a photograph, And he had said without any preamble, "That's a good one." And she had looked up to find him already sitting cross-legged beside her. He was crouching on a concrete floor again. She looked at her bare feet. She thought about the boarding house, the narrow single bed with the springs she had learned to sleep around, the bathroom she shared with 3 other women, the bus ride to Moreland at 5:30 in the morning. She thought about her daughter. She knew it was a daughter. She had known since the first ultrasound she had paid for herself at the sliding scale clinic on Ponce. Her daughter, who she had been talking to every night for 8 months, through every bus ride and double shift and scared hour at 3 in the morning, telling her, "We are going to be okay. I promise we are going to be okay." She thought about what okay actually looked like. "One night," Simone said. "One night." She let him help her up off the milk crate. Her feet were swollen. He noticed and didn't say anything, which was the right thing to do. She went back through the kitchen, told the manager she had a family emergency, handed in her apron, and walked out through the front of Alara with Darius Langford's hand at her back, not holding her, just present, and got into the back seat of his waiting car. They didn't talk much on the drive. The city passed outside the windows, the late light of Buckhead giving way to the broader dark of the highway, then the sparkle of Midtown. His driver, an older man named Theodore, who had worked for Darius for 11 years, caught Simone's eyes in the rearview mirror, and his face did something quiet and private that she couldn't fully read. She looked out the window. She put her hand on her belly. "We're okay," she told her daughter silently. "For tonight, we're okay." In the back seat, the silence between her and Darius was not comfortable, but it was real. She had known him well enough once to distinguish between the silences. There was his working silence, detached, nearly absent, the silence of a man who had left the room without leaving the room. There was his thinking silence, engaged, present, his fingers moving slightly on his knee. And there was this one, which she did not have a name for, which was new. The silence of a man sitting with something he could not yet speak and was not trying to escape. The city continued to move outside. At a red light on Piedmont Road, a woman pushed a stroller across the crosswalk, unhurried, the baby inside it wrapped in something yellow. Simone watched the woman until the light changed and they moved on. She thought about the morning she had found out, the test on the bathroom counter of the penthouse, the light coming through the window at an angle that had always been her favorite, low and early and golden, the kind of morning light that made everything look like something worth keeping. She had sat down on the edge of the tub and held the test and felt the news settle through her body in layers. First shock, then a terror so complete it took her breath. Then something underneath both of those things, something warm and certain and entirely hers. The knowledge that she was going to love this child with everything she had, that no threat, no circumstance, no version of difficult was going to change that. What she had not predicted was how completely Constance would read her. The older woman had walked into the penthouse that morning, carrying coffee from the place on 14th that Darius kept on his standing delivery because it was the only coffee he considered adequate. And she had set the cups on the kitchen counter and turned and looked at Simone with those precise measuring eyes and said, "How far along?" Simone had not asked how she knew. Constance Langford always knew. That was the thing about her. The most frightening and the most clarifying thing about her. She did not guess. She read. She had read Simone correctly from the beginning. Had known probably from the first dinner Darius brought Simone to in the Langford house in Buckhead that this was not a temporary situation. That this woman was not decorative or convenient or easily managed. In that Darius looked at her the way he had never looked at anyone else in 30 years of his mother watching him closely. And Constance had made her calculations accordingly. In the back seat of the car, Simone pressed her hand against her belly and felt her daughter move. A slow roll, comfortable, the movement of a child who had decided that wherever she was home. Simone had spent the last 8 months being afraid. She was still afraid. But something had shifted tonight, cracked open slightly, let some other possibility in. She was not naive enough to call it hope. She was not cynical enough to call it nothing. The suite at the Emory Conference Center was the same one Darius used when he had clients in from the West Coast and needed somewhere neutral and quiet and entirely removed from his penthouse. It had 2 bedrooms, a floor-to-ceiling windows, and a kitchen stocked by the hotel's concierge service. He had called ahead from the car. Simone stood in the center of the living room and looked at all of it with an expression Darius couldn't read. "I'm not your problem to manage," she said. "I know that. Then stop looking at me like I'm a situation that needs resolving." He looked at her, actually looked at her. Not at the pregnancy, not at the uniform, not at the physical evidence of what the last 8 months had cost her, at her face. At the woman who had 6 years ago explained soil bacteria to him at a fundraiser and changed the direction of his entire life. "I'm looking at you," he said, "because I have spent 8 months not looking at anything that mattered, and I am trying to figure out how I get back from that." She looked at him for a moment. Then she sat down on the couch with the slow, deliberate care of someone whose body has been doing hard work all day and is now asking for a moment of stillness. "She's due in 4 weeks," Simone said. She used the third person, the way she always did when she spoke about the baby, as if the baby were already a separate, complete person who deserved to be spoken of with that kind of respect. "Her name is going to be Naomi." "Naomi," Darius repeated. He sat in the chair across from her. Something in his chest opened and did not close again. "I know you're going to want to do things," she said. "I know how you are. The doctors, the apartment, the security. I'm not saying no to all of it. But I am telling you that I am not moving back into your life like a return on a business investment. I am a person who made decisions. Some of them wrong. Is some of them the only thing I could think to do? And I need you to understand that before we figure out what any of this looks like. What were the wrong ones?" She was quiet for a moment. "Leaving without telling you about the baby. Even given what your mother said, even given that I believed her, I made a decision that affected you and our daughter without giving you a chance to choose. That was mine to own." He nodded slowly. "What were the right ones?" "Keeping her." She said it simply. "There were mornings in that boarding house when everything felt impossible, and I thought about all the ways impossible was going to compound once she arrived, and I still never once considered not keeping her." She looked at him. "She is the truest thing I have ever decided." Darius was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm going to talk to my mother." See, Simone looked at him. He saw something in her face that was not hope exactly. She was too careful for hope, had learned too much about what happened when you hoped without verification. But the thing adjacent to it, the thing you feel when someone says a true sentence. "Not ask her," he continued, "not negotiate. Tell her. What she did was not protective. It was not love. It was control wearing love's clothing, and it nearly cost me my family." He said family the way certain words come out when you've been avoiding them. Too carefully, the weight of the word finding its full size in the air. I should have been the kind of man whose wife could come to him with a threat like that and trust that I would stand between her and it. I wasn't. I know that. But I'm telling you what I'm going to do about it now, not to earn your forgiveness. And just so you know." She looked at the window, the city lights below. She thought about the 8 months, the bus rides, the shifts, the boarding house walls, the conversations with Naomi in the dark, the ultrasound she had watched alone at the sliding scale clinic with a paper sheet across her lap and a technician who was kind but rushed. She thought about all of it. "Is there a doctor?" she asked. He had his phone out before she finished the sentence. The physician arrived an hour later. A woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, a maternal fetal medicine specialist who came with a portable ultrasound and the unhurried manner of someone who had seen everything and judged none of it. She examined Simone with quiet professionalism, asked careful questions, and listened to the answers without commentary. When she was done, she sat back and folded her hands. "Baby looks good," she said. "Strong heartbeat, good position. You're going to need more iron. You're anemic. And I want you off your feet as much as possible for the next 4 weeks." She looked at Simone directly. "You've done well given the circumstances. Your daughter has been protected." Simone pressed her lips together. She nodded. She was not going to cry in front of a doctor she had just met, which was a decision she held to for approximately 30 seconds before she stopped holding to it. Dr. Osei handed her a tissue with the practiced grace of someone who kept tissues accessible for exactly this moment. Then she wrote down her personal number on a prescription pad and handed it over. Call me anytime. I mean that. After Dr. Osei left, Darius brought food, room service, in a level of plenty that made Simone sit very still for a moment before she started eating. She ate steadily, methodically, with the focus of someone who had been rationing for a long time and was adjusting to the removal of the constraint. He watched her and said nothing. The watching itself was an act, not surveillance, just presence. Being there, being accountable for being there. When she was done, she looked at him across the table. You said you were going to talk to Constance. First thing tomorrow. She'll deny it. I know. She'll say I'm lying. She'll say I manipulated you. She'll have a version of this story where she is protecting you, and I am the danger. I know what she'll say. Darius set down his fork. I have watched my mother narrate every difficult thing she's ever done as an act of love, and I have been the beneficiary of that narration my entire life. He looked at the table. I built an entire personality around not examining it too closely. She paused. That ends tomorrow. Simone studied him. You could lose her. If you go in hard, she'll take it as a declaration, and she'll respond in kind. You know that. I know. She's your mother. She threatened my wife and my unborn child. His voice was level. She used the access I gave her to walk into your home and deliver a threat designed to make you disappear. And it worked, because I wasn't paying attention, because I made it easier for her to reach you than for you to reach me. He stood and went to the window. I've spent 8 months being angry at you for leaving without understanding that you left because I had made leaving feel safer than staying. That's on me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, it's not only on you. He looked back at her. I should have believed I was worth fighting for. She said it quietly, like a private admission. I should have demanded you hear me about her. I should have trusted that you would choose me if I made you choose. Instead, I made the choice for you and ran. She put her hand on her belly. I'm not saying that to absolve you. I'm saying it because Naomi's going to be watching us figure out how to be people, and I don't want to model that. The part where you run instead of stand. Darius crossed the room. He sat beside her on the couch. Not close enough to presume anything, just close enough to be present. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at his hands. We were both running, he said. You were running from the house. I was running from everything in it. Simone leaned her head back against the couch cushion. She looked at the ceiling. She was very tired, the particular tiredness of someone who has been holding tension in their body for 8 months and has finally, in this room, in this hour, been given permission to let some of it down. The morning came. Darius had slept on the suite's second room and left at 7 to get to his office. He called Simone twice before 9, once to check that Dr. Osei's follow-up appointment was confirmed, and once for no stated reason, which she understood to be the real communication. I'm still here. He met his mother at 10 in his office on Peachtree Street, the 22nd floor, the room where he had closed more deals than he could count, where he had sat across from men who controlled industries and held them without flinching. He sat across from Constance Langford at 10 o'clock and felt something he had not felt since childhood. Something that was not quite fear and not quite grief, but that lived in the same neighborhood. She arrived, as she always arrived, in absolute command of herself. Pressed ivory blazer, hair perfect, the bearing of a woman who had decided decades ago that the world would meet her on her terms. She sat across from him and read his face and said, before he had opened his mouth, You found her? Yes. She's fine, I assume. She is 8 months pregnant, working 3 jobs and living in a boarding house. A pause. Constance looked at the surface of his desk. A muscle in her jaw moved. She didn't have to do any of that. That was her choice. What you gave her that choice, Darius said. When you walked into her home without invitation and told her that if she stayed with me, you would use every resource available to take her child. Constance looked up. I told her the truth. She looked at him evenly. A woman like her, no family money, No connections, no understanding of how people like us operate. In a custody dispute with us, she would have lost. I gave her an honest assessment. You weaponized her love for her child, Darius said. He said it very quietly. You found the one thing she would not risk, and you used it to make her run. And then you watched me spend 8 months not looking for her, and you said nothing. I was protecting. Don't say that, he said. She flinched. He had never used that voice with her. He had grown up not using that voice with her. Hahran had learned very young that Constance Langford was not a woman you interrupted, not a woman you overrode. He was overriding her now. You were not protecting me. You were protecting the version of my life that you designed. The version where I run a company and marry someone from the right family and reflect well on everything you built. He leaned forward. Simone was not a threat to me, Mother. She was the best part of my life, and I was too busy and too careless to make her feel safe enough to stay, and you made sure of it. Constance looked at her hands in her lap. It was the first time Darius had seen her look at her hands in his presence. He had seen her control rooms, dismiss people, dismantle arguments, absorb bad news without visible reaction. He had never seen her look at her hands. She said finally, in a voice that was quieter than her usual register, I was afraid you would choose her and I would lose you. He sat back. I have known since the first time you brought her to dinner, she continued. The way you listened to her, the way you laughed. It was different from anything I had seen from you. And I thought, she paused, I thought if she gave you a child you would be gone, that I would become peripheral. You drove her away and I lost you anyway. The words fell into the silence of the room. I know, Constance said. I'm going to need things from you, Darius said. Not an apology, or not only an apology. I'm going to need you to meet Simone. Not on your terms, on hers. I'm going to need you to understand that Naomi, he watched his mother's face when he said the name, is my daughter, and she will know her grandmother if and only if her grandmother is safe for her to know. And if you cannot do those things, then you and I are going to become people who communicate through my assistant. A long silence. She did not leave immediately. She sat there in the chair across from his desk, in the office that bore her name on the building directory and her influence on every wall. The Langford Capital plaques, the framed awards, the photographs from galas and groundbreakings. She had built this. She had built him. And she sat looking at the floor with her hands in her lap and something on her face that was not quite recognizable, because it was the face of Constance Langford without her architecture. And he had never seen that face before. I thought I was protecting you from being hurt, she said. Her voice had gone quieter, more uncertain, stripped of its usual precision. When your father left, I was destroyed. Not the marriage only, the whole shape of my life. I had organized everything around him, and when he went, I had nothing standing that wasn't tangled up in what we'd been. I lost 2 years of myself to that. She looked at her son. I didn't want anyone to have that kind of hold on you. I thought I was building a wall. I didn't understand I was building a cage. The answer, Darius said, was to love me well enough that I could risk it, not to remove the risk. He looked at her, not without sadness. You tried to protect me from love by destroying it. That is not protection. None. And there is a daughter who will grow up not knowing her grandmother because of it, unless you choose differently. A muscle moved in Constance's jaw. A tear went down her left cheek. She did not wipe it. Naomi, Constance said finally, our daughter. His mother pressed her lips together. Something moved in her face. Something old and unguarded that he had not seen there before. A grandmother seeing a name for the first time. She said in a voice that had lost all of its architecture, I would like to meet her. That will be Simone's decision. Not mine. Constance nodded. I understand. She paused. I will wait as long as it takes. He called Simone from the elevator on his way down. She answered on the second ring. How did it go? She looked at her hands, he said. A pause. That's something. It's a start. He walked out into the March air on Peachtree Street, the city moving around him in all directions. Are you eating? I just had breakfast. There was a food delivery. Good. How is Naomi? She has hiccups, Simone said. She gets them every morning. It's the most ridiculous thing." He laughed. It came out surprised, real, the kind of laugh that doesn't calculate. He stood on a sidewalk on Peachtree Street and laughed at his unborn daughter having morning hiccups, and felt something unlock in his chest that had been locked for a very long time. "Dr. Osi came by this morning," Simone continued. "She wants me to rest until the delivery. Then rest. I have 3 jobs, Darius. You have 1 job right now, and it is growing a person. Everything else is handled." A pause. "Don't tell me what to do. I know. I'm asking. Please." Another pause, longer, and she was thinking. He had learned to give her silence his room. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They were quiet for a moment. The city moved around him. She said, "I'm not coming back to the penthouse. Not yet. I need my own space while we figure out what this is." "I know. I'll find you an apartment, or you can find one. Whatever you want. No pressure, no terms. You're going to try to pay for everything. Naomi is my daughter. Her mother's rent is my responsibility. We're going to have to negotiate what responsibility looks like." "We have 4 weeks," he said. "We can start negotiating whenever you're ready." Another silence. Then, "I'll call you later." He stood on the sidewalk after she hung up. He stood there for a moment longer than was necessary, just existing in the March air, much in the city that had been his for 20 years, and that looked different to him now. Not worse, just more real, more complicated, truer. He had a great deal to rebuild. He knew that. The trust between him and Simone was not a thing that would be reconstructed in a hotel suite over one night in a hard conversation with his mother. It would be reconstructed over time, over 1,000 small actions, over arguments that he stayed for, and conversations he did not redirect, and moments when she tried to tell him something important, and he chose to hear it over choosing to be comfortable. It would be reconstructed in the delivery room 26 days later, when Naomi Adiz Langford came into the world at 3:47 in the morning, weighing 6 pounds 14 ounces, not with a full head of dark hair and her mother's specific expression of taking in a room and deciding what she thought of it. The labor was 15 hours. Darius was there for all of them. He had not asked to be there. Simone had not invited him exactly. She had simply called him at 11 at night when the contractions began, because there was nobody else she trusted to drive her to the hospital without panicking, and because 3 in the morning in a labor and delivery room was not a moment she wanted to spend alone, and because she was doing many things differently now, including asking for what she needed. He drove. He held her hand when she asked. He let go when she didn't. He did not talk too much or try to fix anything or redirect. He sat with what was happening and let it be as large as it was. When Naomi arrived, he stood at the foot of the bed with both hands pressed over his mouth and both eyes full, and did not try to compose himself, which was the most Darius thing she had ever seen him do. He cried, without any management. He just cried. She had not expected that. It changed something. Not everything, not all at once, but something. It would be reconstructed in the hours after, when Simone lay in the hospital bed, holding Naomi, and Darius sat beside them both and said nothing, because nothing was the right thing to say. It would be reconstructed over months. The apartment Simone chose in Inman Park. The Sunday mornings when he came over and they had breakfast, and Naomi sat between them in her bouncy seat, studying the both of them with those watchful dark eyes. The evening Constance knocked on the door of that apartment with a gift wrapped in yellow paper and stood at the threshold with none of her usual architecture, just a grandmother and a request. The moment Simone stepped back from the door and said, "Come in," not warmly, not yet, but with the openness of someone who believed that people could be given the opportunity to prove themselves. Constance had held Naomi for a long time that evening. She had not said the right things exactly. She was a woman who had spent decades being precise where warmth was called for and rewiring that took more than one visit. But she had held Naomi against her chest and been very still in a way Simone had never seen her be still. And when she looked up, her eyes were wet, and she said, "She looks like Darius when he was this small." Then she had looked at Simone and said more quietly, "And she has your hands." It was not an apology, but it was something. It would be reconstructed in the ordinary moments. The middle of the night when Naomi wouldn't sleep, and both her parents were awake, and the three of them sat together in the small living room of the Inman Park apartment in the dark, and nobody said anything, and that was enough. It would not be rebuilt in a single night. Nothing real is. But it began, the way things always begin that matter, with a man crouching on a concrete floor and deciding to stay, with a woman deciding, after all the evidence had come in, to let him, with a daughter named Naomi Adays who arrived in the world already knowing from the inside what it sounded like when two people told each other the truth.